Now listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you has the power to completely transform the way you experience connection. Every human being lives in two worlds, the world they show and the world they dream about. Avoidant personalities are no different, but their inner fantasies are often misunderstood. People think avoidants want distance because they don't care. That is false. They want distance because they care deeply and they are terrified of losing themselves in the process. Here's the truth. An avoidant doesn't run from love, they run from emotional captivity. They run from pressure. They run from the fear that connection will cost them their identity, their freedom, their power. So if you want an avoidant to stay, you must stop trying to chase their behavior and start understanding their fantasy. Their fantasy is not abandonment. Their fantasy is sovereignty. It is the dream of being chosen without being cornered, of being loved without being controlled, of being valued without being consumed. When you become the person who represents safety instead of demand, calm instead of chaos, presence instead of pressure, you don't have to hold them. They choose to stay. Understand this. People move toward what expands them and away from what contracts them. If your energy says you must prove yourself to me, they feel trapped. If your energy says you are free and I choose you, they feel empowered. Power is magnetic. Freedom is intoxicating. This is not about pretending. This is not about manipulation. This is about alignment. When you live in your own strength, when you are grounded in purpose, when you are emotionally regulated and self-directed, you naturally speak the language of the avoidant's deepest desire. You become the calm center they didn't know they were looking for. Avoidants stay where there is certainty without suffocation. They stay where love feels like expansion, not obligation. They stay where their nervous system can finally rest. And here's the divine principle beneath it all. Love was never meant to imprison. It was meant to liberate. The moment you embody that truth, you stop chasing connection and start attracting commitment. You no longer ask them to stay. Your presence answers the question before it's ever spoken. When you play to the avoidance fantasy, not by losing yourself, but by becoming more of who you truly are, you don't create attachment through fear. You create devotion through freedom. And freedom, when paired with purpose and presence, becomes the strongest bond on earth. That is how you become unforgettable. That is how they never leave. Avoidants are driven by fantasies they rarely speak out loud, not because they are deceptive, but because they themselves often don't fully understand them. On the surface, they may say they want space, independence, or time, but beneath those words lives a much deeper inner vision, the fantasy of freedom without loss, connection without obligation, and intimacy without self-erasure. Until you understand this inner world, every attempt to get closer will feel like resistance pushing against resistance. The avoidant fantasy is not about escaping people. It is about preserving identity. At their core, avoidants fear that closeness will slowly dismantle who they are. They imagine love as a force that demands, monitors, expects, and ultimately controls. So their nervous system learns to associate attachment with danger. This is why logic, reassurance, and emotional intensity rarely work. You are not dealing with conscious thought. You are dealing with a deeply conditioned survival response. Their fantasy then becomes a refuge. In their imagination, they see themselves as self-sufficient, unburdened, and emotionally sovereign. They picture relationships where they are wanted but not needed, desired but not depended upon. This fantasy gives them a sense of power and safety that they may have never felt in early emotional bonds. When you challenge this fantasy by demanding closeness before safety is established, the avoidant doesn't feel loved. They feel threatened. Understanding this changes everything. Instead of interpreting their distance as rejection, begin to see it as self-protection. Instead of taking their withdrawal personally, you recognize it as a nervous system seeking regulation. This shift alone moves you from reaction to leadership. You stop chasing reassurance and start embodying stability. When an avoidant senses that you understand their need for autonomy without judgment, something remarkable happens. Their defenses soften. Not because you convince them, but because you no longer represent a threat to their inner world. You become someone who respects their internal fantasy rather than trying to dismantle it. Respect is the doorway through which trust enters. This does not mean suppressing your needs or abandoning yourself. It means recognizing timing and emotional pacing. The avoidant must first feel safe in their independence before they can choose closeness freely. Choice is everything to them. The moment connection feels optional rather than forced, their system relaxes. At a deeper level, this principle aligns with a universal truth. People open when they feel seen, not when they feel corrected. When you understand the avoidant's unspoken fantasy, you stop trying to fix their behavior and start connecting with their humanity. You speak to their deepest desire, not to be free from love, but to be free within it. When you meet an avoidant's emotional needs without pressure, you step into a rare position. End their life, you become a place of relief. Most avoidants are surrounded by people who often unintentionally transmit urgency, questions that need answers, emotions that need processing, futures that need defining. To an avoidant nervous system, this constant pull feels like weight. Even when love is present, the body interprets it as demand. Pressure, not intimacy, is what drives them away. Emotional needs for an avoidant are simple but profound. They need calm instead of chaos. They need acceptance instead of evaluation. They need space that is not weaponized and closeness that is not conditional. When you offer emotional presence without an agenda, you interrupt their expectation of being overwhelmed. They are used to bracing themselves. When they don't have to brace, their guard lowers naturally. Pressure often hides in subtle forms. It appears as, "Where is this going?" It shows up as disappointment masked as patience. It lives in tone, timing, and body language. Avoidants are extraordinarily sensitive to these signals, not because they are fragile, but because they learned early that emotional demand leads to loss of autonomy. When you remove pressure, you remove the perceived threat. Becoming a place of relief does not mean emotional absence. It means emotional regulation. You do not react intensely to their distance. You do not chase when they pull back. Instead, you remain steady, grounded, and self-directed. This steadiness communicates a powerful message. Connection with you does not require self-sacrifice. Safety is felt, not explained. As relief becomes associated with your presence, something shifts in their internal wiring. Their nervous system starts to link closeness with calm rather than stress. Over time, this creates a new emotional imprint. They begin to reach out not because they are afraid of losing you, but because being with you feels restorative. Relief becomes attachment. This is where most people get confused. They believe attachment is built through intensity, deep talks, emotional breakthroughs, dramatic vulnerability. For avoidance, attachment is built through consistency without invasion. It is built through moments where nothing is demanded and yet everything feels secure. The absence of pressure allows genuine desire to emerge. Meeting their emotional needs without pressure also means trusting the process. You do not rush their unfolding. You allow their pace to be their own. In doing so, you step into emotional leadership. You are no longer asking the relationship to stabilize you. You are offering stability. At its core, this approach honors a deeper principle of connection. Love expands when it is freely chosen. When an avoidant feels that staying is a choice rather than an obligation, they stop resisting closeness. You are no longer someone they have to manage. You become someone they want to return to, again and again. Playing to an avoidant's fantasies is often misunderstood as strategy or manipulation, but in truth, it has nothing to do with pretending to be someone you are not. It is about alignment, meeting another human being in the emotional reality they live in without abandoning your own truth. The moment you sacrifice your identity to keep an avoidant close, the connection is already broken. Avoidants are not attracted to self-erasure. They are repelled by it. What they seek, often unconsciously, is a partner who is whole, grounded, and self-led. An avoidance fantasy centers around freedom, but freedom does not mean chaos or emotional absence. It means the freedom to choose, to approach without being pulled, to stay without being trapped. When you align with this fantasy from a place of self-respect, you communicate strength. You show that closeness with you does not require negotiation of one's soul. This is not something you explain. It is something you embody. Manipulation is rooted in fear. It tries to control outcomes by performing withholding or reshaping oneself to gain approval. Alignment, on the other hand, is rooted in confidence. You do not bend your values or suppress your needs. You simply stop forcing timing, intensity, and expression. You remain emotionally available, but not emotionally invasive. That distinction is everything avoidance can sense when someone is acting from lack. When your energy says, I need you to feel okay, they feel burdened. When your energy says, I am okay and I enjoy choosing you, they feel curious. Curiosity opens doors that pressure never can. This is why losing yourself never works. It creates dependency, and dependency is the very thing an avoidant is wired to escape. True alignment also requires boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are clarity. When you honor your own limits, you show the avoidant that intimacy does not mean entanglement. You demonstrate that two complete individuals can stand side by side without consuming each other. This directly mirrors their deepest unspoken hope for connection. There is also a spiritual principle at play here. What is authentic is sustainable. When you align rather than manipulate, the connection grows naturally because it is built on truth. You are not maintaining an illusion. You are allowing resonance to do the work. Resonance does not demand effort. It emerges when two energies are compatible and unforced. In this space, something powerful happens. The avoidant begins to relax into closeness because they are not responsible for your emotional stability, and you are not threatened by their independence. The relationship stops feeling like a negotiation and starts feeling like a choice. And choice, when grounded in mutual respect, creates the kind of bond that does not need to be held together. It holds itself. Avoidants remain in environments where they feel powerful, respected, and untrapped because where for them is synonymous with safety. When power is taken away through emotional pressure, guilt, or the expectation to perform intimacy on someone else's timeline, their nervous system sounds an alarm. It tells them they are about to lose control over themselves. Distance then becomes the only way they know how to restore equilibrium. Understanding this reframes their behavior from coldness to self-preservation. Feeling powerful does not mean dominating a relationship. It means having agency. Avoidants want to know they can say no without punishment, take space without retaliation, and express themselves without being corrected. When they sense that their autonomy is respected, they relax. Respect, not reassurance, is what stabilizes them. They do not need constant affirmation. They need to feel that who they are is enough and not under review. Respect is communicated through emotional maturity. You do not collapse when they pull back. You do not threaten the bond to regain closeness. You hold your ground calmly. This grounded presence tells the avoidant that connection with you does not require them to manage your emotions. When they are not responsible for your inner world, they feel free to remain in the relationship rather than needing to escape it. The absence of feeling trapped is crucial. Traps are created not by commitment itself, but by expectations that feel non-end. Ego-tiable, statements loaded with future pressure, emotional ultimatums, or unspoken conditions turn intimacy into a cage. Avoidants stay where the future is allowed to unfold rather than being forced into form. Choice keeps the door open, obligation slams it shut. When an avoidant feels powerful within a relationship, they begin to invest voluntarily. This is a paradox many people miss. The more freedom they experience, the more consistent they become. Because consistency is no longer demanded, it emerges naturally. They show up not to avoid conflict, but because they want to. Desire replaces duty. There is also a deeper truth here. Power grows in the presence of emotional safety. When you model self-respect, you invite reciprocity. You do not chase validation. You offer connection from abundance. This shifts the relational dynamic from pursuit to partnership. The avoidant is no longer reacting to pressure. They are responding to respect. At a higher level, this aligns with a universal law. What is freely given has value. What is forced loses meaning. When you allow an avoidant to feel powerful, respected, and untrapped, you are not weakening the bond, you are strengthening it. You create a space where staying is not a compromise, but a conscious, empowered choice. Emotional certainty is not created through intensity, persuasion, or constant communication. It is created through presence that does not waver. For an avoidant nervous system, certainty means predictability without pressure. It means knowing that connection will not suddenly turn into emotional demand, chaos, or obligation. When you embody consistency and calm, you become a stabilizing force in a world where closeness is often felt unsafe. Consistency is not about frequency, it is about reliability. You do not oscillate between closeness and withdrawal to provoke a response. You do not use silence as leverage or affection as a bargaining chip. Your emotional tone remains steady whether the avoidant is near or distant. This steadiness communicates trustworthiness far more than words ever could. Over time, your predictability becomes a signal of safety. Calm presence is especially powerful because avoidants are hyper-attuned to emotional volatility. Raised voices, emotional urgency, or unpredictable reactions register as danger, even if the content is loving. When you remain regulated, you show them that intimacy does not require emotional turbulence. Calm becomes the language through which your care is understood. Grounded confidence is the foundation beneath consistency and calm. This confidence does not seek validation or reassurance. It comes from knowing who you are, what you value, and what you will not abandon in yourself. Avoidants are drawn to this because it removes the fear of being needed to complete someone else. When you are self-contained, closeness feels like a choice rather than a responsibility. Emotional certainty grows when the avoidant knows where they stand without being constantly reminded. You do not test the bond. You do not demand emotional proof. Your actions align with your words, and your words are not excessive. This alignment creates coherence, and coherence creates trust. Trust is what allows an avoidant to slowly lower their defenses. As certainty builds, their internal narrative begins to shift. Instead of asking, "How do I protect myself?" they start asking, "How does this feel so safe?" The relationship no longer triggers vigilance, it invites rest. This is when connection deepens naturally without force or pursuit. At a deeper level, emotional certainty reflects an inner mastery. When you can hold space without losing yourself, when you can remain connected without chasing, you embody emotional leadership. You become someone whose presence reassures rather than destabilizes. For an avoidant, this is rare and profoundly attractive. Ultimately, certainty is not something you ask for, it is something you transmit. Through calm presence, consistent behavior, and grounded confidence, you show that intimacy with you is not a risk. And when risk dissolves, resistance follows. True connection with an avoidant is never built through urgency or emotional force. It is built through purpose, patience, and emotional leadership. Purpose gives the relationship direction without pressure. Patience gives it room to breathe. Emotional leadership gives it stability. Without these three, even the strongest attraction collapses under the weight of expectation. Purpose begins with your own life. When your identity is anchored in meaning beyond the relationship, you bring fullness rather than hunger. Avoidants are deeply sensitive to emotional hunger. They can feel when they are being looked to as a source of fulfillment rather than a companion on the journey. When you live with purpose, your presence communicates abundance. You are inviting them into a life, not asking them to become your life. Patience is the language avoidants understand best. It is not passive waiting, it is active steadiness. You allow closeness to unfold at a pace that feels safe to their nervous system. You do not rush emotional milestones or demand premature vulnerability. By honoring their timing, you show respect for their internal process. Respect builds trust faster than any declaration of love. Emotional leadership means you regulate yourself before asking for regulation from another. You take responsibility for your reactions, your triggers, and your needs. When conflict arises, you respond rather than react. This creates a container where emotions can exist without overwhelming either person. For an avoidant, This is revolutionary. It contradicts their expectation that intimacy leads to emotional chaos. Leadership also means clarity. You are honest about who you are and what you want, without ultimatums or pressure. You do not chase, but you also do not disappear. You stand present and available, anchored in self-respect. This balance of openness and boundaries signals maturity, and maturity feels safe. Over time, purpose keeps the connection meaningful, patience keeps it sustainable, and emotional leadership keeps it secure. The avoidant begins to experience relationship not as a threat to autonomy, but as a source of stability. They are not being pulled forward, they are being guided by example. At a deeper level, this reflects a universal principle. Growth happens in safety. When you lead emotionally, you create that safety. You show that love can be strong without being forceful, deep without being consuming. In that environment, an avoidant does not have to protect themselves by leaving. They can stay not because they are afraid to lose you, but because they finally feel safe enough to be fully present. Thank you for giving your time and openness to this message. May it serve you, strengthen you, and guide you toward deeper understanding. Goodbye for now, and remember, when you lead with clarity, calm, and see. LF respect. The right connections naturally choose to stay.